Binding data to repeater control. In this lesson, we'll discuss how the data is connected with repeater control. A repeater control can be used to build small and flexible reports on the web form with templates for the items. Templates used in repeater control are header template, which can be used to create the header rows of the table data. Footer template. This can be used to create the footer rows of the table. Item template, which is used for formatting the items and rows to be displayed. And alternating item template, and this performs item formatting. Now then, let's talk about how to bind data to repeater control. Open a new web form. And go to Toolbox and click Repeater Control. Drag it and place it on the web form. Double-click the form window to move Page Load Method of Code window. We have to include system.data.sql client namespace. Add this coding on Page Load Method. You know very well about SQL connection and SQL command objects. Here, the data source is used to get or set the data source that provides the data for populating the repeater. The data member is used to get or set the table in the corresponding data source property that is bound to the repeater. Press the Shift and F7 keys to move to design mode. Click HTML tab to move to HTML mode. And then add this code under Repeater Control tag. The major difference between the repeater and data grid control is how HTML is handled. ASP.NET creates the HTML for displaying the data grid control as an HTML table. But the repeater allows the developer to decide how to display the data. So, you may choose to display the data in an HTML table or an ordered list. The choice is yours, but you'll have to insert the appropriate HTML into the ASP.NET page. The databinder.eval method uses reflection to parse and evaluate a data binding expression against an object at runtime, and here our object is repeater control. It will render the contents of the number field for each row in the data source collection. Press F5 to run the program. Now the repeater control is displaying data from the student table in table format. So, I hope you've got a clearer picture on how to create and render data using repeater control. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about how to bind data into a data list control. Developing simple web application. In this lesson, we're going to discuss how to create an application and how to perform the database transaction. Before entering into the application, I'd first like to tell you what the actions are that we're going to accomplish in our application. This is the application to perform the transactions, such as storing user input to the database and modifying values in the database. Also, to delete the information about a particular student in the database, and displaying data through data grid. Now let's start designing our application. Open a new web application with default web form 1. Here, we are using 4 text box controls for student number, name, age, and date of join, respectively. Using the calendar control, we can get the date and display in the date of join field. When we click on Add, it will store the new student's information into the database table. When we click on Search, it will display all the information about the student based on the student's number. You can change the information of a particular student using Update. If you want to delete the information about a particular student in the database, you can use the Delete button. It will delete the student's information permanently from the database table. And the data grid is used to display all the records from the table in grid structure. Well now, we'll see how to create database and table for student information system. Go to Start and click All Programs. Click Microsoft SQL Server and Enterprise Manager. Click on Database folder. Now then right-click on the database page and click New Database, and give a name for your database. Now, click the Tables icon. It will show you a list of default tables in the database. Right-click on the table window and create a new table. Here, we're going to add fields named SNO and SNAME, age, and date of join. Now, give the name for your table. Move to the application. Double-click the calendar control to move to code window. Add this coding in calendar control _ election changed method. Here, this code is used to display the selected date in the text box control. For example, the selected date is converted into a string using toString method, and the converted date string is displayed in text box control. Now press the Shift and F7 keys to move to design mode. Double-click the Add button, and here we're going to start our first database transaction. We must first import SQL client namespace in the top of the code window. Create an object for SQL connection to establish the database connection. Here, mention your server name, database name, user ID, and password. Okay then, go to the button-click event and add this coding. Using ADO.NET. What is ADO.NET? ADO.NET is the data access component for the .NET framework. It is an evolution of the ADO data access model that directly addresses user requirements for developing scalable applications. It is an object-oriented set of libraries that allow you to interact with data sources. Commonly, the data source is a database, but it also could be a text file, an Excel spreadsheet, or an XML file. ADO.NET is connectionless rather than connection-oriented. Disconnected data can be used to communicate between distributed applications or web services. Like connected data, disconnected data supports multiple tables and data binding. But disconnected data also makes it possible to navigate forward and backwards in a result set and manipulate XML. The purpose of ADO.NET is to provide access to the relational data and XML and application data and retrieving result. The basic ADO.NET data providers are connection, command, data adapter, and data reader objects. This is the basic architecture of ADO.NET. Internally, it contains data set with XML and data reader with SQL components to support disconnected architecture. This architecture contains two main parts: command execution and caching. Command execution requires features like connectivity, execution, and reading of results. The dataset handles caching of results. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about how ADO.NET works. How does ADO.NET work? ADO.NET, which stands for ActiveX Data Objects.NET, is the primary data access API for the .NET framework. It provides the classes that you use as you develop database applications with Visual Basic.NET, as well as other .NET languages. Here, we're going to discuss an important scenario, how the ADO.NET works. ADO.NET makes it possible to establish a connection with a data source, to send queries and update statements to the data source, and process the results. Now then, you're looking at the figure that will show you the workflow of ADO.NET. Here, .NET Data Provider enables connectivity and command execution to core data sources. Once a command has been executed, the results can be read using a data reader. In addition, results can be used to render a data set with data adapter. This is typically called filling the data set. The dataset tracks changes to the basic data in the cache. These changes are submitted to the database by means of data adapter. One of the advantages of using disconnected data architecture is improved system performance due to the use of fewer system resources for maintaining connections. Another advantage is that it makes ADO.NET compatible with ASP.NET web applications, which are inherently disconnected. In the upcoming lesson, we're going to discuss each component of ADO.NET in detail. ASP.NET Objects. In this lesson, we're going to discuss ASP.NET Objects and its properties. The basic objects available in ASP.NET are Response Object, Request Object, Page Object, Server Object, Session Object, and Application Object. Now let's first start with Response Object. The Response Object represents a valid HTTP response that was received from the server. It means that the response object is used to send output to the user from the server. There are two basic methods used to perform page navigation using response object, and those are response.redirect and response.write. Now, response.redirect method acts as a hyperlink to open a requested page from the current page. When the response.redirect method is called, it creates a response whose header contains a status code and the target URL. When the browser receives this response from the server, it uses this header information to generate another HTTP request to the new URL. When using response.redirect method, it invokes two round trips to the server. First, it requests an original page, and then it requests the redirected page. Response.write method is used to display string values in web form. We can display any values in web form using response.write method. We can also display values using response.out.write. Here is the syntax for displaying text on web form. The main difference between response.write method and response.out.write is the latter one produces a formatted output. Now then, let's discuss these objects with samples. Open a new web form. Go to Toolbox and click the button control. Drag it and place it on the web form. Change its text property. Go to Project menu and click Add Web Form. Give a name for your new web form and change the BG color property. Now then, move to Web Form 1 and double-click the button control and go to the code window and add this coding. In response redirect method, we are passing requested page as argument. When you click the button 1, it will redirect you to the requested page. Go ahead and run the program and see the result. Let's move on to design mode. Double-click button 2. If you want to display the message box in your page, add this coding. Here we use JavaScript to display the message box. Run the program and then check the answer. Basic data providers. The .NET data providers are a core component within the ADO.NET architecture. It's used to make the communication between a data source and a component, an XML web service, or an application. It performs various actions such as allowing you to connect to a data source, retrieving and manipulating data, and updates the data source. Basic data providers available in .NET are SQL Server, OLEDB, which stands for Object Linking and Embedding Database, ODBC, which is Open Database Connectivity, and Oracle. Now first let's start off with SQL Server. SQL Server Data Provider resides in the system.data.SQL client namespace. It should be used to access the SQL Server 2000. The classes within SQL Client Provider begin with SQL, so the connection class is SQL Connection, and the command class is SQL Command, and so on. Now we'll talk about connection and command classes in upcoming lessons. OLEDB Data Provider. OLEDB Data Provider resides in system.data.OLEDB namespace. It provides access to SQL Server version 6.5 and earlier. Also provides access to other databases such as Oracle, Sybase, and Microsoft Access. ODBC Data Provider. The ODBC.NET Data Provider provides access to ODBC data source with the help of ODBC drivers. It resides in the Microsoft.data.ODBC namespace. Oracle. If you build an application using .NET with Oracle as back-end database, you can use Oracle Data Provider to support the new Oracle 9i data types, as well as cursors useful for running Oracle stored procedure. That returns the result set. Oracle Data Provider resides in the system.data.oracle namespace. In our training course, we're going to discuss all the database examples with SQL Server. Now, in the next lesson, we'll talk about various objects available in ADO.NET. ADO.NET Objects. ADO.NET includes many objects which can be used to work with the data. Various objects are available in ADO.NET, and they are SQL Connection, SQL Command, SQL Data Reader, SQL Data Adapter, Data Set, and Data Table and Data View objects. Let's get started with SQL Connection. To interact with the database, you must have a connection with it. And the connection helps you identify the database server, the database name, the username, the password, and other parameters that are required for connecting to the database. We can pass all this information as an argument to the SQL connection object. We can create a connection object by using this statement. And here, the data source identifies the server, and initial catalog represents the database name. Various methods are available in SQL Connection Object, and they are Open, which opens the connection to our database, Close, which conversely closes that connection, Dispose. This releases the resources on the connection object. SQL Command. Command objects are used to execute commands to a database across a data connection. We can use command object to send SQL statements to the database to perform certain actions. It allows you to specify what type of interaction you want to perform with the database. For example, you can use select, insert, update, and delete commands on rows of data in a database. And this is the code for creating SQL Command Object. Here, SQL Connection Object creates a connection to the database. Using SQL Command Objects, we are passing query string and connection object as a parameter to affect the database table. There are various methods available in command objects, and they are execute non-query. This expects to run a command or a stored procedure that affects the state of a specified table. We can use this method to perform manipulation like insert, update, delete, and creates on the database table. Execute scalar. This returns only one value after executing the query. And then execute reader. This expects to run a query command or a stored procedure that selects records. SQL Data Reader. The Data Reader object provides a forward-only, read-only connected stream record set from a database. The Data Reader is returned as the result of the command object's execute reader method. Code for SQL Data Reader is given below. To create an SQL data reader instance object, you need to call the executeReader method of the SQL command class, rather than directly using a constructor. The basic methods available in command object are read method, which is used to move the record pointer to the first row, which allows the data to be read by the column name or the index position. Has row method. This checks if any data exists, and it's used instead of the read method. And close method. It is used to close the SQL data reader. Now then, you've got some basic ideas about basic objects used in ASP.NET. If you want to learn more about SQL data reader, refer to this URL. We'll discuss more objects in the upcoming lesson. Here, we use Insert SQL Query to insert values into database table. Text box 1 contains student number, text box 2 contains the name of the student, text box 3 contains the student's age, and then text box 4 contains the date they joined. You know very well about execute non-query, because we've already discussed it. Go ahead and press the Shift and F7 keys to go to design mode. Double-click Search button to go to the button Click Event. Add this coding and see the logic. Here, we're going to retrieve the data from the database table using the Select SQL Query. Using SQL Data Reader, we can read each record in the table. Here, a field of 0 represents the first field in the database table, that is the student number, and the field of 1 represents the student's name, field of 2 represents the age, field of 3 represents the date they joined. Now then, let's move to design mode. We're going to discuss how to update the existing data in the table. Double-click the Update button to go to Button Click Event. Here, we are using the Update SQL Query to update the database table based on the student number. Similarly, we can delete the particular record in the table by using the Delete SQL Query. Just try this on your own to do this action. Go to Design Mode and click Refresh button. We've already discussed about binding data into data grid control, so just add this coding in the button click event. Now then, let's run our project. Now we're going to insert a new record into the database. Just give all the entries and click Add. It will display the message that inserted successfully. If you want to confirm whether the data inserted in the database is there or not, go to Enterprise Manager and right-click on the student table. Click Open Table and return all rows. You can see the data we inserted using our application. Go to the application. Insert 2 more records into the database. If you want to view the information about any available student, you can now use the Search option. Enter the student number in the column specified and then press the Search button. It displays all the information about that particular student. If you want to edit any information about the student, you can use the Update option. If you want to delete the student information whose number is 1, give the number in the text box and press the Search button. It will display the information about the specified number. Now, click the Delete button to delete the information from the database. By clicking Refresh, you can view all the data in the database. Now, I hope this application has given you a clear idea for how to create ASP.NET web application. In the upcoming lessons, we're going to discuss how to strengthen the application. Dataset and SQL Data Adapter Objects. In this lesson, we're going to discuss dataset SQL Data Adapter, and Data View Objects in detail. First off, let's start with dataset. A dataset is an in-memory representation of a collection of database objects, including tables of a relational database scheme. The dataset represents a complete set of data, including tables, constraints, and relationships among the tables. Because the dataset is independent of the data source, a dataset can include data local to the application, as well as data from multiple data sources. The dataset class is a collection of data table classes where it can hold data from multiple tables, but it is much more than that. The dataset automatically uses XML to transfer or to marshal data from one computer to another. The dataset contains all the objects as a collection of objects. The data in a dataset is organized in one or more data tables, and each data table contains collections of data row, data column, and constraint objects, along with the collections of data relations objects linking to other parent and child tables. The data row object represents a single record in the data table and is used to add, retrieve, and modify data in the data table. The data column object is the basic unit for retrieving or defining the schema definition for a data table. It contains the specific information for each column or field in the data table, including the name, data type, and other attributes, such as unique, read-only, allow DB null, and auto-increment properties. The data relation object defines a relationship between two tables in a data set. It represents a classic parent-child or primary key-foreign key link between rows of data in the two tables. The constraint object defines a rule that can be enforced to ensure the integrity of the data in the data table. Now then, let's move on to SQL Data Adapter. The data adapter is the bridge between the data source and the dataset tables. Data adapter contains four main properties, and they are select command, insert command, delete command, and update command. It also contains two main methods, and they are fill method, where it fills a data table with the data retrieved from a data source, and update method, and this updates a data source with the changes made to the data in the dataset table. Table mapping in a data adapter links the names of columns and tables in the data source with those in the dataset data table. Now then, I hope you have a clearer idea about the data process through dataset and data adapter. In our upcoming lessons, we're going to talk about how to use data access objects to develop a simple application.